The unexpected often finds us in life's most ordinary moments. On a crisp autumn morning in downtown Atlanta, amidst the usual rush of people hurrying to their destinations, a simple act of kindness was about to unfold into something extraordinary, a story that would touch hearts and challenge preconceptions. Sarah, a 32-year-old nurse, was walking back to her car after picking up her morning coffee when she noticed an elderly gentleman standing confused at a busy intersection. His hands trembled as he gripped his walking cane, his eyes darting anxiously between the street signs above. While others brushed past, something in his vulnerable demeanor made Sarah pause. "Sir, are you all right?" she called out, approaching him carefully. The man turned, relief washing over his weathered face. He was well dressed in a navy blazer and pressed slacks, though his clothes seemed to hang a bit loose on his frame. I can't seem to find my way," he admitted, his voice quavering. "Everything looks different now." What started as a simple offer to help someone find their way would soon reveal an incredible connection that spanned decades and proved that destiny works in mysterious ways. As Sarah listened to the gentleman introduce himself as Mr. Thomas, a 78-year-old retired history teacher, she noticed how his bright blue eyes carried a distant sadness behind their kindness. She offered to help him reach his destination, a local diner where he was supposed to meet his son for breakfast. As they walked together, Mr. Thomas began sharing stories from his past, his voice growing stronger with each step. But it wasn't until they reached the diner's entrance that he mentioned something that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. "You know," he said, pausing at the door, "I used to teach at Washington High School back in the 60s. Sarah's eyes widened. That was her mother's alma mater. As Mr. Thomas continued speaking, describing the challenges of those turbulent times, he mentioned a particular student who had left an indelible mark on his life, a young woman who had shown him the true meaning of courage and grace during the school's integration. The description he gave matched Sarah's mother perfectly, down to the yellow ribbons she always wore in her hair. But before Sarah could process this extraordinary coincidence, Mr. Thomas reached into his wallet and carefully pulled out a folded, aged photograph. What he revealed next would not only change both their lives forever, but would also heal wounds that had been left unspoken for over half a century. As Mr. Thomas's trembling fingers began to unfold the photograph, his eyes welled up with tears. The image he was about to share would connect two families across generations, revealing a debt of gratitude that had waited decades to be repaid. In that moment, standing outside a modest diner on a busy street, the past and present were about to collide in the most remarkable way. What Sarah discovered that morning would remind us all that sometimes the greatest acts of kindness come full circle in ways we could never imagine. As she stood there, staring at the photograph in Mr. Thomas's hands, she realized that this chance encounter was anything but random. The story that was about to unfold would prove that in a world often divided by differences, the threads of human connection run deeper than we know. But what was in that photograph, and how would it link these two strangers in a way that neither could have anticipated? The answer would reveal a truth that had been waiting 50 years to come to light. The photograph, now worn at its edges from years of careful handling, showed a young black student and a white teacher standing together at a science fair. The student held a first-place ribbon, her smile radiant with pride and accomplishment. But what caught Sarah's attention wasn't just the striking resemblance to her mother. It was the date written in faded ink on the back, May 15, 1968. "That young lady right there," Mr. Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion, "saved my life." He gestured to a nearby bench, and as they sat down, he began to share a story that had been weighing on his heart for half a century. The science fair had taken place during one of the most turbulent springs in their city's history. Tensions were high, and many teachers had refused to support the newly integrated science fair. "I was one of only 3 white teachers who agreed to mentor the black students," Mr. Thomas explained, his hands still trembling slightly as he protected the precious photograph from the morning breeze. "Your mother, she was different. While other students were understandably guarded, she approached me with such determination, such grace. She had this incredible project about cardiac health, inspired by her father's heart condition. Sarah felt her breath catch. Her grandfather had indeed suffered from heart problems, eventually passing away when her mother was in college. The details were aligning in a way that seemed almost surreal. But Mr. Thomas wasn't finished. The story he was about to share would reveal how one student's compassion had changed not just his life, but the lives of countless others. As he continued, Mr. Thomas described the night before the science fair, when he had received threatening phone calls for supporting the black students. He had seriously considered not showing up the next day. But when he arrived at school that morning, visibly shaken, it was Sarah's mother who noticed his distress. She pulled me aside, he recalled, his eyes distant with memory, and said something I've never forgotten. "Mr. Thomas, fear is just courage taking a pause to pray." Then she showed me her project, a study on how stress affects heart health. She had added a whole section about how unity and understanding could literally heal hearts. The science fair had been a turning point, not just for the school, but for the entire community. Sarah's mother's project had won first place, judged blindly by a panel from the state university. Her victory had made the local papers, becoming a symbol of progress and possibility. But there was more to the story, something that Mr. Thomas had never shared with anyone, something that had brought him to this particular diner on this particular morning 50 years later. As he reached into his blazer pocket, he pulled out another item that made Sarah's eyes grow wide with recognition. It was a small, worn journal with a familiar pattern, yellow ribbons hand-drawn on its cover. "Your mother left this behind in my classroom during all the excitement of the science fair," Mr. Thomas explained. "I've been carrying it with me for years, hoping to return it. But after I moved away for work, I lost touch. When my son told me he tracked down some information about former students, I knew I had to come back." Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for the journal, but Mr. Thomas held it back for a moment. "Before you open this," he said, his voice growing serious, "there's something else you need to know. Something your mother wrote in here changed not just my life, but the lives of hundreds of students who came after her. And today, well," he paused, looking up at the diner's sign with tears in his eyes. "Today isn't just about returning a journal. It's about fulfilling a promise 50 years in the making." With gentle care, Mr. Thomas opened the journal, revealing pages filled with neat, thoughtful handwriting. Sarah immediately recognized her mother's distinctive penmanship, the same careful style that had addressed countless birthday cards and letters throughout her childhood. But what she read on those pages would reveal a depth to her mother's story that she had never known. The journal wasn't just a typical teenage diary. It was filled with observations about heart health, stress, and healing, both physical and social. Her mother had meticulously documented the effects of kindness and understanding on people's well-being, recording pulse rates and blood pressure readings from willing participants at school. But between the scientific notes were personal reflections that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "Your mother noticed something that none of us educators had figured out," Mr. Thomas explained, his voice soft with admiration. "She saw how fear and division were literally making people sick. The last entry." He paused, carefully turning to a dog-eared page near the back. "This one changed everything." Sarah leaned in to read, her coffee long forgotten. The entry was dated the day after the science fair. In it, her mother had written about a revolutionary idea, a program that would bring students and teachers together outside of class, creating opportunities for real understanding across racial lines. She had outlined a complete plan, including health monitoring to prove that unity and compassion could measurably reduce stress and improve heart health. "But that's not even the most remarkable part," Mr. Thomas continued, his hands shaking as he reached for his wallet again. "You see, after reading this, I couldn't just let it remain an idea. I had to act. And that's when your mother's project became something much bigger than a science fair experiment." He pulled out a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. Sarah's heart nearly stopped when she saw the headline. But before she could read it fully, a voice called out from the diner's entrance. "Dad, is everything okay? I've been waiting inside." Mr. Thomas looked up, and for the first time, Sarah noticed tears streaming down his face. But these weren't tears of sadness. There was something else in his expression, a mix of joy, anticipation, and what looked like victory. "Son," he called back, "come here. There's someone you need to meet. Remember that story I've been telling you about all these years?" about the student who inspired the foundation. Sarah's mind was racing. Foundation? What foundation? She looked again at the newspaper clipping in Mr. Thomas's trembling hands, catching glimpses of words like nationwide and millions helped and her mother's name. The realization of what she was seeing began to dawn on her, but surely it couldn't be what she was thinking. As Mr. Thomas's son approached, carrying a large binder filled with what appeared to be photographs and documents, the elderly teacher turned back to Sarah with an expression that suggested the biggest revelation was yet to come. "Your mother's journal," he said, tapping it gently, "didn't just inspire a program. It started a movement. And today," he glanced meaningfully at his son, who was now standing beside them with a knowing smile, "today is the day we finally complete the circle." The binder in his son's hands held what appeared to be 50 years' worth of history that had somehow remained hidden from Sarah until this moment. As they began to open it, Sarah realized that her simple act of kindness this morning hadn't just been about helping a lost elderly man. She was about to discover how her mother's compassion half a century ago had set in motion something far greater than anyone could have imagined. The binder opened to reveal hundreds of photographs, each one telling a story of lives transformed. But what caught Sarah's attention first was a familiar face, her mother, much older than in the science fair photo, standing in front of a large building with Mr. Thomas. The sign behind them read Hearts United Foundation, where understanding heals. The date on the photo was 1988, 20 years after the science fair. "Your mother never knew," Mr. Thomas said softly, but her journal entry became the blueprint for what would become the largest youth health and unity program in the country. His son, David, began carefully laying out documents on the bench, grant approvals, newspaper clippings, and letters from students whose lives had been changed by the foundation's work. "After the science fair," Mr. Thomas continued, "I took your mother's research to the State Board of Education. They were skeptical at first, but the data was undeniable. Her simple idea, that bringing people together could literally heal hearts, proved true in ways we never imagined." He pointed to a graph showing decades of health statistics from schools that had implemented the program. But just as Sarah was processing this incredible revelation, David pulled out another photograph that made her gasp. It was of herself as a child, around 7 years old, at what appeared to be one of the foundation's summer health camps. "You were there," David said, smiling. "You probably don't remember, but that summer camp was one of our first major programs." Sarah's mind raced back to distant memories of a summer filled with laughter, health checkups, and children from all backgrounds playing together. She had always thought it was just another summer camp, but now, "Mom never said anything," she whispered. "Why didn't she tell me?" Mr. Thomas and David exchanged a significant look. "There's more," David said, turning to a section marked Confidential in the binder. "We've been trying to find your mother for years, but after she moved away in the late 80s, we lost track. We didn't know." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "We didn't know about her own heart condition." Sarah felt her chest tighten. Her mother had passed away just last year from heart complications, the same condition that had taken her grandfather. But something in David's tone suggested there was more to this story. Mr. Thomas reached for another document, his hands trembling more than ever. "Your mother's original research," he said, pulling out a faded paper, "it wasn't just about stress and unity. There was a genetic component she was studying, something about her family's heart condition. The last page of her journal." He carefully turned to the final entry, one that Sarah hadn't yet seen. She had discovered something crucial, something that could help others with the same condition. But before Mr. Thomas could reveal what was written on that last page, his son's phone buzzed urgently. David's face paled as he read the message. "Dad," he said, his voice tight with emotion, "they're here. All of them. They've been waiting inside the diner this whole time." Mr. Thomas smiled through his tears. "Sarah," he said, turning to her with an intensity that made her breath catch, "there's a reason we chose this particular diner, on this particular day. Behind those doors are 50 years' worth of lives changed by your mother's work. But more importantly," he paused, holding up the final journal page, "what's written here could change thousands more, including yours." The diner's door opened, and Sarah caught a glimpse of dozens of faces peering out, each one holding what appeared to be yellow ribbons, her mother's signature symbol. The truth about why she had been destined to help a lost elderly man on this autumn morning was about to become clear, and it would shake her understanding of everything she thought she knew about her family's legacy. As Sarah stepped into the diner, her breath caught in her throat. The space was filled with people of all ages and backgrounds, each wearing a yellow ribbon, her mother's symbol of hope and unity. But what struck her most was the large banner hanging across the back wall. 50 Years of Healing Hearts, a tribute to Katherine Johnson's legacy. An elderly woman stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "I was there," she said softly, "at that science fair in 1968. Your mother's project saved my son's life." She gestured to a middle-aged man standing beside her, a prominent cardiologist's badge clipped to his jacket. One by one, people began sharing their stories, lives transformed, careers inspired, and hearts literally healed through the Foundation's work. Mr. Thomas carefully unfolded the final page of the journal, his hands steadier now as he began to read aloud. "I've discovered something in our family's genetic code," her mother had written. "The heart condition that took Dad isn't just about genetics. It's about connection. Our hearts are literally programmed to heal through unity. The stress of division damages our cardiac cells, but when we come together, something remarkable happens." David stepped forward with a medical file. "Your mother's research was decades ahead of its time," he explained. "Modern genetic studies have finally caught up to what she hypothesized. People with your family's heart condition who participate in community connection programs show a 70% better survival rate. We've been quietly implementing her protocols in cardiac units across the country." But it was what happened next that made Sarah's knees weak. From the diner's kitchen emerged a team of cardiac specialists, led by a woman Sarah recognized from medical journals. "We're not just here to celebrate," the specialist announced. "Thanks to your mother's research and the data collected through the Hearts United Foundation, we've developed a new treatment protocol. Sarah, your mother's final gift wasn't just her research. It was a roadmap to healing for everyone who shares this condition." The specialist handed Sarah a medical document. "This is the first approved copy of the Katherine Johnson Protocol for Genetic Cardiac Healing. It's being implemented in hospitals nationwide starting today." Sarah's hands trembled as she read the title page, which included a dedication. "To my daughter Sarah, who will one day understand that our greatest healing comes through helping others." Mr. Thomas touched Sarah's shoulder gently. "But there's one more thing," he said, nodding to David. From behind the counter, David brought out a small, worn wooden box. "Your mother left this with me the day she moved away," Mr. Thomas explained. "She made me promise to give it to you only when you were ready, when you had discovered the truth about healing hearts on your own." Inside the box was a single yellow ribbon and a letter dated just weeks before her mother's passing. As Sarah began to read it aloud, the diner fell silent. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, you've already shown that you carry the most important genetic trait of all, the ability to see past differences and help others. Your act of kindness will have led you to this moment, just as I knew it would." Sarah couldn't finish reading through her tears, but she didn't need to, because at that moment, through the diner's windows, she saw something that made her heart soar. Dozens of people were gathering outside, all wearing yellow ribbons, all holding signs about how the Hearts United Foundation had touched their lives. They were just a fraction of the millions who had been impacted by her mother's vision. Mr. Thomas smiled knowingly. "Your mother always said that healing hearts wasn't just about medicine. It was about moments like this morning, when you chose to help a stranger. That simple act of kindness completed a circle 50 years in the making." He paused, looking around the diner at the gathered faces. "But perhaps the greatest healing of all is knowing that some hearts, like your mother's legacy, never truly stop beating. They just keep spreading their rhythm of love and understanding to others." As Sarah tied her mother's yellow ribbon in her hair, she realized that her simple act of helping a lost elderly man hadn't just connected her to her mother's past. It had opened the door to a future where healing hearts, both literally and figuratively, would continue for generations to come. The afternoon sun streamed through the diner's windows, casting a warm glow over the gathering that had transformed from a chance encounter into something miraculous. Sarah sat at a booth, surrounded by people whose lives had been touched by her mother's work, each sharing stories that filled in pieces of a puzzle she hadn't even known existed. The cardiologist who had been saved by her mother's research explained how the Hearts United Foundation had evolved over 5 decades. What began as a simple high school science project had grown into a nationwide movement, with health centers, summer camps, and research facilities all operating on the principle that unity and understanding were essential components of physical and emotional healing. Your mother's work didn't just change medicine, he explained, showing Sarah through decades of research data. It changed how we think about healing itself. We now know that isolation and division can be as dangerous as any physical condition, while connection and community can literally strengthen the heart muscle. Mr. Thomas, now sitting with a cup of tea growing cold before him, shared stories about the years he had worked alongside Sarah's mother, implementing her vision in schools across the country. She never wanted recognition, he said softly. She always said the real success was in seeing people come together and watching barriers break down one heartbeat at a time. As the afternoon went on, Sarah learned how the foundation had quietly supported thousands of families affected by genetic heart conditions, providing not just medical care but building communities of support. The yellow ribbon had become a symbol of hope in cardiac units across the nation, a reminder that no one had to face their health challenges alone. David revealed how they had been preparing for this day for months, tracking Sarah down through her nursing work, watching as she demonstrated the same innate compassion that had made her mother's vision so powerful. When we saw you working in the cardiac care unit, he said, we knew it was time, but we needed to see if you would make the same choice your mother did, to help someone despite their differences. The gathering began to wind down as the sun set, but not before plans were made. The Katherine Johnson protocol would be implemented in Sarah's hospital first, with her helping to train staff in both the medical and community building aspects of the treatment. Her mother's journal would be preserved in the Foundation's museum, inspiring future generations of medical professionals to look beyond traditional healing methods. As Sarah prepared to leave, Mr. Thomas handed her one final item from the wooden box, a small key. Your mother bought a building, he explained, just 2 blocks from your hospital. She left instructions for it to become the newest Hearts United Center, but only when you were ready to lead it. Standing outside the diner in the gentle evening light, Sarah looked at the yellow ribbon in her hand and finally understood why her mother had always told her that the greatest healing happens in the spaces between heartbeats, in those moments when we choose to reach out to others, to bridge divides, to see our common humanity. You know, Mr. Thomas said, giving her a gentle hug goodbye, your mother always said that science could explain how the heart beats, but only love could explain why it beats. Today, you've proved her right on both counts. As Sarah walked back to her car, she passed the corner where she had first met Mr. Thomas that morning. A group of medical students sat on the bench there, wearing their yellow ribbons, already planning volunteer programs for the new center. She smiled, knowing that this wasn't just an ending. It was a new beginning, a continuation of a legacy that would keep healing hearts, one act of kindness at a time. The story of the lost elderly man and the kind nurse had come full circle, but its ripples would continue spreading, touching lives and healing hearts in ways that proved that sometimes the greatest medical breakthroughs don't happen in laboratories, they happen in moments of simple human connection, when we choose to see past our differences and help someone in need.